The silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It stretched, thin and brittle, over the heads of 200 guests, a suffocating blanket laid over the entire congregation. It pressed down on my shoulders, heavier than the intricate, hand-sewn pearls of my wedding dress, a dress that suddenly felt like a Halloween costume, a cruel and elaborate joke I was the butt of. My price tag had been $4,000, and now I felt like a fool in cheap lace. My eyes burned, a dry, hot sting, but I refused to let the tears fall. I would not give them that satisfaction. I had already cried enough over Mark, the man who was supposed to be standing here beside me, the man who was, at this very moment, precisely 45 minutes late. Or perhaps he was not late at all. Perhaps he was exactly where he intended to be, which was anywhere but here. Standing at the altar, alone, under the grand, unforgiving arch of the church, was a new kind of agony. The air, once filled with joyful anticipation and the expensive, cloying scent of $2,000 worth of white roses, now felt thick and heavy. It was curdling with pity and something sharper, something meaner. A cough echoed from the back pew. It was a single, nervous sound that seemed to rip through the fragile stillness. It shattered the held breath of the room, and then, as if a dam had broken, came the whispers. They started low, a sibilant rustle of silk and disapproval, like snakes moving through dry grass. He actually did it. I cannot believe he just left her standing there. Poor girl, how utterly embarrassing. Poor girl. I clenched my fists inside my white satin gloves, the delicate lace digging into my palms so hard I felt the sting. I was not a poor girl. I was a 30-year-old woman. I was a registered nurse, a good one. I was a mother. And apparently, I was the biggest fool in all of Chicago. My gaze dropped to the bouquet in my hands, lilies and baby's breath, trembling violently. I had chosen them with such care, imagining walking back down this very aisle with him, his hand in mine, our future stretching out before us. Now, the aisle looked impossibly long, a gauntlet of staring, pitying, judging eyes. The whispers grew louder, no longer hushed. They were morphing from sympathy to something uglier, something laced with a dark, schadenfreude-fueled amusement. I caught a snippet of high-pitched laughter from the groom's side, quickly shushed. Someone's aunt, probably. The one who had told me at the rehearsal dinner that I was lucky to be landing a man like Mark. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that started at my collarbone and raced up my neck, making my scalp prickle beneath the weight of the veil. I had to get out of here. I took one step back, away from the empty space where my groom should have been, then another. The heavy satin of the skirt swished around my ankles, a sound like a weary sigh of defeat. Each step was a lifetime. The organist had long since stopped playing, his hands hovering awkwardly over the keys, his face a mask of professional horror. The only sound was the mortifying shuffle of my own feet and the rising, shameless murmur of the crowd. They were not even trying to hide their gossip now. I felt their eyes on my back, 1,000 tiny, sharp needles. I kept my head high, or at least I tried to, focusing on the heavy oak doors at the end of the aisle. Just reach the doors, Ava. Just get out of this room. Then the murmuring stopped. It did not just fade, it ceased. It was cut off, clean, as if a switch had been thrown, plunging the entire church back into that deafening silence. The abrupt change was more shocking than the whispers. It made the hairs on my arms stand up, and a cold shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the air conditioning. I paused, halfway down the aisle, a spectacle in white. I did not dare turn around, but I could feel it, a new presence. The entire atmosphere in the church had shifted, crackling with a sudden, tense energy. It was no longer just pity and mockery. This was something else. This was fear. A shadow fell over me, long and dark, blocking the afternoon light streaming from the stained glass window. A man had moved to stand directly in my path, blocking my escape. I slowly lifted my head, my neck stiff. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in a black suit that looked like it cost more than my entire wedding. My dress included. It was not just expensive, it was tailored to perfection, outlining broad shoulders and a lean, powerful frame that seemed to hum with contained energy. His shirt was midnight black. No tie, the top 2 buttons undone to reveal the strong column of his throat. His dark hair was slicked back from his forehead, emphasizing the sharp, unforgiving, and brutally handsome lines of his face. He was beautiful, in the way a panther is beautiful just before it strikes. Dangerous. His eyes, the color of old whiskey and secrets, met mine. There was no pity in them, no amusement, just a flat, assessing, and utterly possessive intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. He looked like he owned the entire city, and he was not impressed with this small, sacred part of it. He was every inch a leader, radiating an aura of absolute, unquestionable control, a mafia boss. If I had ever seen one outside of a gritty television drama, he did not speak to me. He looked past me, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. He raised one hand, a casual, almost lazy gesture that nonetheless commanded the breathless attention of every single person in the room. The silence was absolute. I was certain I was the only person in the building who was still breathing. He brought his gaze back to me, holding me captive, pinning me in place with that look. Then, his voice. A low, resonant gravel that vibrated through the air and settled deep in my bones, cut through the silence. She is mine. It was not a request. It was not an explanation. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of ownership that echoed in the vaulted ceiling of the church, as binding as any vow. My mind reeled, short-circuiting. I had never seen this man before in my life. I would have remembered. Who was he? What was he doing? This was my wedding day, my day of ultimate public humiliation, and now this stranger was intervening. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, a single, unified sound of shock. I saw my mother in the front row, her face as white as my dress, her hand pressed to her chest. I saw Tasha, my best friend and maid of honor, her jaw hanging open, her bridesmaid's bouquet completely forgotten. The man kept his eyes locked on mine. He held out his hand. It was large, steady, unadorned except for a heavy, dark signet ring on his smallest finger. He was offering me a way out, an escape. I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at the stunned, judgmental faces of the guests who had come here to see a wedding and were getting a circus instead. I looked back at the altar, empty, where my future was supposed to have been, where I had been left like so much trash. Mark was gone. The wedding was over. My life as I knew it had just imploded in the most public, painful way imaginable. And here was this stranger, this dangerous, compelling, terrifying man, claiming me in front of everyone who had just witnessed my shame. I should have been terrified. I should have screamed, or run in the other direction, or told him in no uncertain terms to leave me alone. But as I looked into his dark, unwavering eyes, the strangest thing happened. The burning humiliation that had threatened to consume me began to fade. The knot of panic in my chest, the one that had been tightening for the last hour, loosened, just a fraction. I did not understand why he was here. I did not know what he wanted or what his proclamation meant. But in that surreal moment, standing there in the ruins of my life, I felt something I had not felt in a very, very long time. Safe. My hand, still trembling inside its satin glove, lifted, ignoring the fresh wave of gasps, ignoring the sheer, undeniable insanity of the moment. I placed my fingers in his. His grip was immediate, firm, and incredibly warm. It was instantly grounding. He did not tug or pull. He simply enclosed my hand in his, a silent, powerful promise. He turned, his hand still holding mine, and began to walk toward the doors. He moved with an unhurried, predatory grace, and the crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. I walked with him, the train of my ridiculous dress trailing behind us like the ghost of a life that would never be. The whispers started again, but they were different now, no longer mocking. They were shocked, confused, and deeply, deeply fearful. We reached the heavy oak doors. He pushed one open with his free hand, and the bright, warm afternoon sunlight streamed in, momentarily blinding me. He led me out onto the church steps, into the fresh air, away from the suffocating judgment and the scent of dying roses. He did not let go of my hand. He did not say another word. He just stood beside me, a solid, unmovable presence in a world that had just been shattered as the life I thought I wanted crumbled into dust behind us. And for the first time that day, for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally, truly, breathe. How had I gotten here, standing on the sun-drenched steps of a church in a ridiculously expensive dress, my hand in the grasp of a man who looked like he had stepped out of a dark, violent dream? What series of disastrous life choices had led me to this moment? To be rescued like a damsel in a B movie by a stranger with the eyes of a predator. The answer was simple. Really, it was a life lived in a state of quiet, relentless desperation. My name is Ava Collins. I am 30 years old. I am a registered nurse at Chicago General, a job that demands every ounce of my physical and emotional energy. I am also a single mother, and that, right there, is the beginning and the end of my story. My entire world, the reason I breathe, the reason I get up after being knocked down time and time again, is my daughter, Emma. Emma is 5 years old. She has my curly brown hair and a smile that could, and frequently does, stop my heart. She has sunlight and laughter and crayon drawings taped to the wall of our small, 2-bedroom apartment. She is the one perfect, unblemished thing in my life, and she is the one thing my ex-husband, Mark Benson, is determined to take from me. My marriage to Mark had not just failed, it had imploded, leaving behind a crater of debt and betrayal. He was a man who looked good on paper charming, successful in his vaguely defined finance job, the kind of man my mother had been thrilled to see me with. But behind the expensive suits and the easy smile was a core of pure, cold malice. He did not just want to leave me, he wanted to destroy me on his way out. When I finally found the courage and the evidence of his cheating, not to mention the hidden credit cards, to file for divorce, I had naively believed it was the end. It was only the beginning. Mark, it turned out, could not stand to lose. He could not stand the idea of me walking away, of me choosing to build a life without him, and so he had decided to take the only thing he knew I could not live without. He sued me for full custody of Emma. The city, this huge, sprawling metropolis, felt like a battlefield. I was trying to carve out a sliver of a future for myself and my daughter, to find a promotion from my charge nurse position, maybe get into a nurse practitioner program one day. But my days were not my own. They were a frantic blur of 12-hour shifts, daycare drop-offs, and hurried, tense meetings with my overworked, underpaid legal aid lawyer. I was drowning in paperwork and pressure. The financial strain was a constant, dull ache behind my eyes. I poured every spare cent into the legal fight, which meant more shifts, more overtime, more time away from the very daughter I was fighting to keep. Mark, on the other hand, had money, and he had a team of slick, merciless lawyers who painted me as an unstable, overworked, and emotionally fragile single mother who could not possibly provide a suitable home. They used my long hours at the hospital, the very hours I worked to keep a roof over our heads, against me. They called me to the stand and asked me if it was true I sometimes missed tucking Emma into bed. They watched me with cold satisfaction as I was forced to say yes. I was alone in this fight, almost. My one anchor in the storm was Tasha. We'd met in nursing school. Two terrified 20-year-olds trying to figure out how to place an intravenous line without passing out. We had bonded over lukewarm cafeteria coffee and shared terror during our clinical rotations. She was my person. Tasha was the one who had shown up at my apartment the night I found out about Mark's affair, her arms loaded with 2 bottles of cheap wine and a box of the trashiest donuts she could find. She had held me while I shattered, and then she had helped me, piece by piece, put myself back together. She was Auntie Tasha to Emma, the one who would show up unannounced for movie nights, who would watch Emma without a second thought when I was called in for an emergency shift at the hospital. Tasha was the one who kept trying to remind me that I was more than just a nurse, more than just a mother, more than just Mark's ex-wife. She kept trying to make me see that I was still Ava. But Ava was tired. Ava was running on fumes, her entire being focused on one single, desperate goal: protect Emma. Keep her safe. Keep her with me. Mark was not just an ex-husband. He was a constant, looming threat, a shadow that fell over every small joy. His attacks were relentless. He would forget child support payments, forcing me to scramble to pay the rent, which was already over $1,500 a month. He would schedule supervised visits and then cancel at the last minute, leaving Emma in her party dress, her face crumpling in disappointment, asking me why Daddy did not want to see her again. That was why I had said yes to Robert. Robert, the man who was supposed to be waiting for me at the altar. Robert, the man who had not shown up. He was a doctor at the hospital, kind, stable, and, I had thought, reliable. He was everything Mark was not. He was safe, or so I had told myself. He had proposed after only 6 months. A whirlwind romance fueled more by my desperation than any real, deep-seated passion. I had convinced myself that it was the smart move. Marrying Robert would mean stability. It would mean a second income. It would mean a partner, another adult in the house. It would mean that in court. I would no longer be the struggling single mother. I would be a respectable, married woman with a doctor for a husband. I had been trying to build a fortress to protect my daughter, and I had used this wedding as the final, reinforcing wall. I needed to win this custody battle. I needed to put an end to the fear that choked me every time I looked at my sleeping daughter's face. The fear that one day, a judge would bang a gavel and decide that Mark's money was more valuable than my love. That was my motivation. That was my only goal. And now, that wall had not just been breached, it had been publicly, spectacularly demolished, leaving me more exposed and vulnerable than ever. Standing on those church steps, I should have been thinking about Robert. I should have been wondering where he was, what had happened. But as the breeze, cool for a June afternoon, rustled the ridiculous, expensive lace of my veil, I was not thinking of him at all. I was thinking of the mountain of legal bills on my kitchen counter. I was thinking of the custody hearing scheduled for next month, the one my entire future, Emma's future, depended on. I was thinking that I had just handed Mark Benson the single greatest piece of ammunition he could ever have wished for, the bride, jilted at the altar, humiliated, abandoned, clearly, as his lawyers would argue, a woman who made poor, unstable choices. My hand was still in the stranger's grasp. His skin was warm, his grip unyielding. He had claimed me, and I, in my desperation, had just walked out of that church with him. A man I did not know. A man who radiated an authority that was so far beyond my understanding. It felt like it was from another world. It was the single most reckless, insane thing I had ever done in my life. And yet, his hand was the only solid thing I had to hold on to. The bright sunlight was a physical assault after the cool, dim light of the church. I blinked, my eyes watering, the world outside seeming too loud, too sharp. The grip on my hand was the only thing that felt real. This man, this stranger, had not let go. We stood on the top step, poised between the disaster behind us and an unknown, terrifying future. I could feel the eyes of the wedding guests who had begun to creep out of the church doors, staring at us. Then, a new voice sliced through the stunned silence. A voice I knew too well, a voice I despised. "Ava?" It was sharp, grating, and full of a smugness that turned my blood to ice. I flinched. A reaction so ingrained it was automatic. My head snapped toward the sound. Mark Benson, my ex-husband. He was striding up the sidewalk, not a guest, but an invader. He was dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking suit, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed. He must have been watching, waiting, lurking somewhere nearby, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He had a smile on his face, a cruel, triumphant smirk that widened as he took in the scene. He saw me, in my $4,000 dress, a bride with no groom. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy as he reached the bottom of the steps. "This is a new low, even for you, Ava. Stood up at the altar. I almost feel sorry for you." "Go away, Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it almost choked me. "You are not welcome here." "Oh, I think I am," he said, his eyes glittering. He looked past me, his gaze landing on the man still holding my hand. Mark's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He was clearly surprised I was not alone. He sized up the tall, dark man beside me, and for a moment, Mark's usual bravado seemed to shrink, but only for a moment. He mistook the man's silence for weakness. "And who is this?" Mark sneered, gesturing with his chin. "The replacement, did you have him waiting in the wings, classy?" I said, "Go away." I repeated, louder this time, trying to pull my hand free. But the stranger's grip tightened, not painfully, but with an unmistakable finality. He did not look at Mark. He did not acknowledge him in any way. He just kept his dark eyes focused on the street, as if waiting for something. Mark laughed, a short, ugly sound. "It does not matter. This is perfect." He took a step up, and I recoiled, pulling back against the stranger's hand. Mark stopped, his eyes narrowing, his amusement vanishing, replaced by that familiar, cold fury. "You just made this so much easier for me, Ava. You just handed me my case. You just gave me Emma." The name of my daughter, spoken in his venomous tone, on this day, in this place, was a violation. A raw, primal fear clawed its way up my throat, stronger than the humiliation, stronger than the shock. "You will not," I said, my voice shaking. "You will not take her from me." "Oh, I will," Mark said, his voice dropping to a conversational, chilling tone. "A judge is going to want to hear all about this, about how you were so unstable. You got yourself abandoned at your own wedding, how you are clearly a danger to our daughter." "You are the danger," I spat, finally finding my voice. "You are the one who abandoned us." "History, Ava, ancient history," he waved a dismissive hand. "What matters is now, and right now, you look like a fool, and you are mixed up in things you cannot even begin to understand. Did you really think I would not find out?" I stared at him, my mind scrambling. "Find out what are you talking about?" Mark's gaze shifted, becoming sly. He looked at the silent man beside me. "I'm talking about your new arrangements, your new friends. Did you think signing that contract would solve all your problems? Did you read the fine print, Ava? What you were promising in return?" I was completely, terrifyingly lost. "Contract. I do not know what you are talking about. I have not signed any contract." "Do not lie to me," Mark suddenly roared, his face turning a mottled red. He lunged up the steps, and I cried out, stumbling backward. Before I had even registered the movement, the stranger was no longer beside me. He was in front of me. He had moved with a speed that was almost invisible, a fluid, deadly grace. He was a solid wall of black tailored wool, completely shielding me from Mark. He had not raised his hands. He had not made a sound. He simply existed, an immovable object of pure menace. Mark stopped dead. Halfway up the stairs, his angry rant dying in his throat, he was shorter than the stranger, and from this angle, He was forced to look up. The hunter had suddenly become the prey. "You," Mark breathed, and the color drained from his face. All the false bravado, all the smug superiority evaporated. He was looking at the man in front of me with a dawning, sickening horror. I should have known. "It is you, Raldi. You are Dominic Raldi." The name meant nothing to me, but it clearly meant everything to Mark. "My God!" "Ava," Mark whispered, his eyes wide with genuine terror, not for himself, but at what he was seeing. "Do you even know who he is? Do you know what you have done, that contract? You claim you did not sign, you just sold your soul. Ava, and you just lost your daughter for good." "What contract?" I demanded, my voice a high, thin wail. I pushed at the stranger's back. "What is he talking about? Who are you?" Dominic Raldi did not turn. He did not look at me. He kept his attention focused entirely on Mark, who was now trembling, his face pale and sweaty. When Dominic Raldi finally spoke, his voice was the same low, gravelly rumble I had heard in the church, but it was no longer neutral. It was arctic. It was the sound of a closing door, a final judgment. "You," he said, and the single word vibrated with such cold authority that Mark visibly flinched. "You will never speak her name again. You will never speak her daughter's name again. You will remove yourself from this sidewalk, and you will forget you ever saw us. Your business with this woman," he paused, "is concluded." But the custody, the hearing," Mark stammered, trying to gather the last shreds of his shattered confidence. "I have rights. The law." "Your rights are irrelevant," Dominic said, as if stating the weather. "The law, as you understand it, no longer applies to you. You are a loose end, and He tilted his head, a gesture that was terrifyingly casual. "Despise loose ends. Leave now." Mark looked from Dominic to me, his face a mask of fury, humiliation, and, beneath it all, profound fear. He wanted to say more. I could see the acidic insults, the final, parting threats, lined up on his tongue. But he looked back into Dominic Raldi's dark, whiskey-colored eyes, and whatever he saw there broke his nerve completely. He said nothing. He simply turned, scrambling down the steps so quickly he nearly tripped, and all but ran down the street, not looking back. He disappeared around the corner, a bully vanquished, a coward exposed. The street was silent again, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. A long, black, impossibly sleek car, a sedan of some kind that looked more like a polished weapon than a vehicle, pulled up to the curb. It had appeared from nowhere, silent as a shark. The back door opened. Dominic Raldi turned to me. His face was unreadable, impassive. He had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my life, exposed a threat I did not understand, and dismissed my ex-husband as if he were a fly. And he was still holding my hand. "Contract," I whispered, the word tasting like ashes. What contract was he talking about? "You're asking the wrong questions," he said, his voice flat. He tugged gently on my hand. "We are leaving." "Leaving? Leaving where? Who are you? What did Mark mean? What is happening?" The panic was back, cold and sharp, but this time it was different. It was not just humiliation. It was a new, terrifying dread. I was in the deep end now, and I could not feel the bottom. "You can stand here on the steps in this dress and wait for the reporters your groom's family has undoubtedly called," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Or you can get in the car. You can be safe." "Safe?" I almost laughed, a hysterical sound bubbling in my chest. "You call this safe? A man just ran away from you in terror. My ex-husband thinks I signed a contract with you. You are Mafia." It was not a question. The expensive suit, the aura of power, the name Raldi, the instant, paralyzing fear he inspired, it all clicked into place. He did not deny it. He just stared at me, his patience, which I sensed was a very finite resource, clearly wearing thin. "Ava," he said, and the sound of my name in his mouth was a shock. He had not heard Mark use it. He had just known it. Get in the car. This was the moment, the turning point. I could pull my hand away. I could run back into the church, into the arms of my pitying mother and my confused friends. I could face the consequences of Robert's abandonment, and I could face Mark in court, alone, with this new, damning evidence against me. Or I could get in the car. I looked at his outstretched hand, still holding mine. I looked at the dark, open, and waiting interior of the car. I thought of Emma, of her small, trusting face. Mark was terrified, and that meant, for the first time in 3 years, he was not in control. This man, Dominic Raldi, was... I did not know if this was a rescue or a capture. I did not know if I was running from a fire or jumping into the ocean. But I could not stay here. I took a breath, gathered the voluminous, ridiculous satin skirt of my wedding dress in my free hand, and I got in the car. The door closed behind me with a heavy, final sound. I felt a strange, terrifying calm settle over me. I had just made a choice, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that my life and the life of my daughter would never, ever be the same. The man I had just met, the mafia boss who had claimed me, was my only hope, and perhaps my greatest danger. The interior of the car was a silent, cold world of black leather and tinted glass. The door had closed with a sound of heavy, expensive finality, like a vault being sealed. We moved, gliding through the city streets with a smoothness that was unnerving. I could not see outside. The windows were too dark. I was in a bubble, suspended, still clutching the satin bulk of my wedding dress. I sat as far from him as I could, pressed against the door. My heart was a wild, trapped bird, beating against my ribs. I was alone in a car with Dominic Raldi, the man who had terrified Mark into flight, a mafia boss. I turned to look at him. He was not looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, his profile cut from stone, his hands rested on his knees, large and steady. He was the calm center of the storm that had just consumed my life. My voice was a reedy, pathetic whisper. "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere safe," he replied, his voice a low vibration that seemed to fill the car. He did not turn his head. "My daughter," I said, the words catching in my throat, a fresh wave of panic rising. "Emma, I have to get to my daughter. She's with my friend, Tasha, at her apartment. I have to call her." "I have already taken care of it, Mao," he said, still not looking at me. I stared at him, my mind unable to process the words. What do you mean? You have taken care of it." He finally turned his head, and the full, suffocating force of his attention landed on me. His whiskey-colored eyes were assessing, unreadable. "Before we left the church, I made a telephone call. Your friend Tasha and your daughter Emma are no longer at Tasha's apartment. They are on their way to a secure location. We will meet them there." I was dumbstruck. How did you know about Tasha or Emma? How did you know where they were?" A flicker of something, maybe impatience, crossed his face. "I make it my business to know things. When I decided to attend this wedding, I learned about everyone involved, especially you." "Why?" I demanded, my fear momentarily eclipsed by a burning, desperate need for answers. "Why were you there and Mark?" "He said I signed a contract. He said I sold my soul." "What did he mean?" Dominic turned his gaze forward again. The car took a smooth, silent turn, descending into what looked like an underground garage. "Mark Benson is a fool. He was attempting to blackmail you, to use information he did not understand. The contract he was referencing was not yours. It was Robert's. The name of my missing groom, the man who had abandoned me, landed like a stone in the silence. Robert, what does Robert have to do with this?" "Your fiancé," Dominic said, and the word fiancé sounded like an insult on his tongue, "had a significant gambling problem. He owed a great deal of money to people who do not tolerate late payments, people I know." The car stopped. A man in a dark suit, built like a refrigerator, opened the door from the outside. The air in the garage was cool and smelled of concrete. Dominic did not move. He continued speaking to me. Robert became desperate. He offered collateral to secure his debt. He offered his future wife, a nurse with a clean record, as a guarantee. He was foolish enough to put it in writing. The world tilted. The air in my lungs turned to ice. He sold me. He used me as collateral. He is a weak man, Dominic said, as if that explained everything. He believed that by marrying you. He was bringing you under his protection, and by extension, under the protection of his new partners. When the time came to pay, he ran. He left you to face his debt. I was not there to see a wedding, Ava. I was there to collect. To collect? Me, I whispered, and the horror of it, the sheer transactional coldness, was a new kind of violation. That was his intention, Dominic said, his voice hard. It was not mine. He finally got out of the car, and then he was at my door, opening it, holding out his hand just as he had on the church steps. Mark Benson learned of this arrangement. He intended to use it to prove you were involved in criminal activity, to prove you were an unfit mother. He was going to take your daughter. I stared at his hand. He had just told me I was a piece of property in a failed transaction, and yet this same man had stood up in that church, faced down my ex-husband, and provided me an escape. Why, I asked, my voice raw. Why help me? Because, he said, his eyes locking on mine, I do not tolerate men who use women and children as shields. He ran. You stayed. Now, get out of the car. Your daughter is waiting. I took his hand. He led me not to an apartment, but to a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling penthouse. It was a palace of glass and steel, with a view of the entire city skyline. It was beautiful, sterile, and it felt like a cage. Tasha was there, sitting on a white leather sofa, her face pale. The moment she saw me, she ran, her bridesmaid dress swishing. Ava, my God, what is happening? Who are these men? And then I saw her, Emma. She was sitting at a glass table, coloring in a book, a plate of cookies beside her. She looked up, her face lighting up. Mommy, you look like a princess. She ran to me, and I collapsed to my knees, burying my face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her. The one real, true thing in my life. I held her so tightly she grunted a small complaint. Over the next few weeks, that penthouse became my world. Dominic Raldi was true to his word. Tasha and Emma and I were kept in a state of luxurious, terrifying safety. He had men posted outside the elevator, silent sentinels who never left. Dominic himself was a ghost. He would appear in the evenings, dressed in his impeccable suits, his presence sucking all the air from the room. He would nod at me, ask me if I required anything, and then disappear into his office for hours. He never touched me. He rarely spoke. But his world, the one he commanded, made its presence known. Mark did not stay gone. Terrified as he was of Dominic, his hatred for me and his obsessive desire to win were stronger. He filed an emergency motion for custody. His lawyers, the same slick, heartless men, presented their case. They painted me as a fallen woman, the jilted bride who, in a fit of instability, had immediately run from the church and into the arms of a known organized crime figure. They used Dominic's name. They used the word mafia in a sealed affidavit. They claimed I was a mob mall, that I had put my daughter in imminent danger by associating with a man like Dominic Raldi. I was served the papers by a stone-faced man in a suit, right in the penthouse. Tasha found me an hour later on the floor of my new marble bathroom, hyperventilating, the papers clutched in my hand. He was right, I sobbed, the words tearing out of me. Mark was right. I have lost her. You made it worse. I hurled the last words at Dominic, who was standing in the doorway, his face impossible to read. I had not even heard him approach. I expected him to be angry. I expected him to be cold, dismissive. but he just walked in, took the crumpled papers from my hand, and read the motion. "He is desperate," Dominic said, his voice calm. "Desperate men make mistakes. He has overplayed his hand." "Oh, overplayed," I shrieked, pushing myself to my feet. "He just told a judge I am living with a mafia boss. How is that overplaying? He is telling the truth." "It is not the truth," Dominic said, his voice dropping, taking on that dangerous Arctic edge. "It is his interpretation. Now, we will provide ours." He made a telephone call. 2 hours later, a man arrived. He was older, with silver hair and a suit that looked even more expensive than Dominic's. He was not a thug. He was a shark. He was Dominic's personal lawyer. "Mark Benson has made a fatal error," the lawyer, Mr. Hayes, told me, his voice like smooth, expensive whiskey. "He has officially, in a court of law, accused Mr. Raldi of being a mafia boss. This is slander, Mr. Raldi is a legitimate businessman, a pillar of the community, a philanthropist, and he is now my client's fiancé." I choked. "He is... what?" Dominic Sitke, who had been staring out the window, turned. "It is the logical solution. You were left at the altar. A family friend," he said the words with a slight, ironic twist, "stepped in to protect you from your hysterical ex-husband. You are now my fiancé. We are a family. Mark Benson is not a concerned father. He is a harassing, unstable ex. We will destroy him." He was not asking. He was telling me. That night, I could not sleep. I found him on the terrace, the city lights spread out below him like a carpet of fallen stars. "This is insane," I whispered, pulling the silk robe he had provided tighter around me. "Fiancé, you cannot just, declare that—" "I can," he said simply, "and I have." "Why?" I asked, the real burning question. "Why are you doing this? I was Robert's debt. You said it yourself. You do not owe me this. You are putting yourself in the middle of my mess." He turned to me. The wind was cool, tugging at his dark hair. "I told you, I do not tolerate men like Mark Benson, or men like Robert. They are weak. They prey on people they think are weaker." He took a step closer, and my heart hammered. "But you are not weak, are you, Ava? You are a nurse. You are a mother. You have been fighting him alone for years. You are a warrior. You just needed a new shield." I looked up at him, at this complex, dangerous man. He was a criminal. He was a boss. He was ruthless. But he was the first man who had ever looked at me and seen a warrior. He was the only person who had ever made Mark Benson afraid. He was offering me not just safety, but victory. I was terrified of him. I was terrified of the dark, violent world he moved in, a world of shadows and secrets. But as he stood there, a silent guardian against the city, I realized, with a new and different kind of terror, that I was not just grateful, I was drawn to him, this man who controlled everything. I realized I did not just want his protection, I wanted his respect, and, God help me, I was beginning to want his affection. I had been pulled into his world, and I was no longer sure I wanted to find the way out. The day of the hearing was a cold, gray Tuesday. It was the kind of day that felt like it was holding its breath, the sky a flat, unforgiving sheet of iron. I stood in the marble-floored bathroom of the penthouse, dressed not in my nurse's scrubs, but in a severe, dark blue suit that Mr. Hayes, Dominic's lawyer, had arranged to be delivered. It was an armor I had not chosen, but it was an armor nonetheless. My stomach was a tight, painful knot. This was it. This was the day I would either win my daughter back or lose her forever. The engagement to Dominic Raldi had changed the entire landscape of the legal battle. Mark's lawyers had been thrown into a spin. They had gone from attacking a vulnerable, abandoned woman to accusing one of the city's most powerful and most feared businessmen. The slander and defamation countersuit from Mr. Hayes had been swift and brutal. But Mark was not just a bully. He was a cornered, rabid animal, and he had one last venomous card to play. A few days before the hearing, Tasha had been the one to find it. She had been scrolling through social media, a nervous habit, when she let out a strangled gasp. "Ava, you need to see this." It was a video, a grainy, poorly lit piece of footage from a security camera, time-stamped from over 8 months ago, long before Robert had even proposed. It showed me, in my scrubs, exiting the hospital after a grueling double shift, so tired I was practically weaving on my feet. I was walking to the staff parking garage. A dark sedan had pulled up. The window had rolled down. The footage was too grainy to see the driver's face. But it clearly showed me stopping. It showed me leaning in, talking for a few seconds. It showed me accepting a thick, white envelope. Then, the video cut to a new piece of footage. It was Robert, my worthless, runaway fiancé, sitting in a dimly lit room, his face bruised. He was speaking to the camera, his voice shaking. "Her name is Ava Collins," he said, his eyes wide with terror. "She knew. She was the one. She set it all up. She was the one who managed the money, the payments. She was my contact. She has been working for the Raldi family for over a year." My blood ran cold. I sank onto the sofa, my hands shaking so hard I could not hold the phone. "It is a lie," Tasha whispered, her face ashen. "Ava, it is a lie. Right, what was in that envelope?" I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. I do not know. A man, he said he was a grateful patient. His mother had been in my unit. He said it was a gift for the nurses' station, a donation. It was $10,000 in cash for the pediatric ward's Christmas party. I handed it straight over to the hospital administrator. "And the driver," Dominic's voice came from the doorway. He had entered so silently. I did not know he was there. He was watching the video on his own device, his face a mask of cold fury. I never saw his face. I whispered, "It was dark. He just said, 'For the kids,' from a friend," and he drove away. I thought it was strange, but I was so tired, I did it." "It was a setup," Dominic said, his voice a low growl. "Robert was not the one who owed money. Not at first. He was a tool. The people who wanted to hurt me. They have been planning this. They used him to get to you. They planted you in my life." He looked at me, his eyes burning with an intensity I had never seen, a terrifying, controlled rage. "Mark did not find this video. He was given it. He's being used, just as Robert was. He's a pawn in a much larger game, and he just brought it into a courtroom." Now, standing in that bathroom, the video was all I could think about. Mark's lawyers had submitted it to the judge under seal. They were going to paint me as a liar, a criminal, a money launderer for the mob. Using my own daughter's hospital as a front, they would use my own fiancé against me. Dominic had been gone all night. He had left the penthouse after seeing that video, his face set in grim, unyielding lines. He had not told me where he was going. He had simply paused at the door, turned, and said, "It ends today. I will not let them use you. I will not let him win." His words had been a vow, but they had sounded like a threat, a promise of the violence that lurked just beneath his civilized, tailored surface. I met Mr. Hayes in the lobby. He was impeccable, calm. "Ava," he said, his voice reassuring. "Today will be difficult, but we are prepared. Do you have any questions?" "Where is he?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Where is Dominic?" "Mr. Raldi is attending to a separate but related matter." "Mr. Hayes said, his expression giving nothing away. "He will be here. Do not worry. He will not let you face this alone." We walked into the courtroom. It was a private, sealed hearing, no press, just me, Tasha in the front row, Mark and his team of lawyers. Mark looked terrible. His face was pale and puffy, and he had a tick in his left eye. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. He looked terrified. When he saw me, his expression was not triumphant. It was a strange, pleading look. The judge, a stern older woman named Judge Alani, entered. We all rose. We all sat. The air was thick with a tension so heavy it felt hard to breathe. Mark's lawyer, a sharp man named Henderson, began. He laid it all out, the jilting, my immediate shacking up with a known underworld figure. And then he played his ace. Your Honor, we have new evidence. Evidence that this entire affair has been a long premeditated criminal conspiracy. We have video. He presented the footage, the grainy image of me at the hospital, the white envelope, then the terrified, bruised face of Robert, my missing fiancé, confessing to a crime I did not commit. I heard Tasha gasp behind me. I felt the judge's eyes on me, cold and appraising. Miss Collins, Henderson said, his voice dripping with false piety, was not an innocent party. She was a willing participant, a money runner for the Raldi organization, and she now lives with the boss. We contend that Emma Benson is not just in a dangerous environment. Your Honor, we contend she is in a criminal environment. We ask for immediate, sole custody to be granted to her father. My world was shrinking. The room was closing in. It was a lie. All of it, a dark, twisted lie built from a kernel of truth. I looked at Mark. He was staring at his hands, his knuckles white. He would not look at me. He had done this. He had brought this ruin upon me, all because he could not stand to lose. Mr. Hayes, the judge said, her voice flat. Your response. Mr. Hayes stood up, calm as ever. Your Honor, this is a desperate, slanderous, and frankly, pathetic attempt to defame my client. The video of Miss Collins at the hospital shows her accepting a charitable donation, which hospital records, provided in our brief, will confirm was turned over to the administrator in its entirety that very night. As for the testimony of Mr. Robert Davidson. It was at that moment that the courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. Dominic Raldi walked in. He was not alone. He was flanked by two of his silent, suited guards, and between them was Robert, my missing fiancé. He was not the bruised, terrified man from the video. He was clean, shaven, and wearing a new suit. But his face was a mask of waxy, absolute terror. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, and then he looked away, his gaze fixed on the floor. Dominic did not look at me. He walked to the front of the courtroom, his presence dominating the space. He stopped in front of the judge's bench. Right, Your Honor, he said, his voice that low, commanding rumble. My apologies for the interruption. I believe my employee now has something he needs to say. He has a new affidavit he would like to submit. Henderson was on his feet, sputtering. Your Honor, This is an outrage. It is intimidation. This man is the defendant in my client's claims. The judge banged her gavel. Silence, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Raldi. What is the meaning of this? The meaning, Your Honor, Dominic said, his voice cold, is that this man, Robert Davidson, was coerced into making a false statement. He was held against his will by Mr. Benson. The courtroom exploded. Mark leaped to his feet. That is a lie. A lie. He works for him. Mr. Davidson, the judge asked. Her eyes narrowed, her voice like steel. Is this true who held you? Robert was shaking, his entire body trembling. He looked like he was going to be sick. He looked at Mark, at his own lawyer, and then he looked at Dominic. Dominic just watched him, his face impassive, but his eyes were a promise. A promise of what? I did not know. It was him, Robert whispered, pointing a shaking finger, not at Dominic. At Mark. He found me, Robert stammered. Mark, he found me at my cousin's house. He and some other men, they beat me. They told me. They told me what to say. They said Dominic Raldi would kill me if I did not. They said he was a monster. They filmed me. Mark said it was the only way to save my life, to save Ava from him. It was a brilliant, terrifying lie. Mark's face crumpled. No, he is lying. He is lying for him. He is afraid of him. Tell them, Robert. Tell them the truth. I am telling the truth, Robert cried, and this time his tears looked genuine. He threatened me. He said he would ruin me. He said he had already. Robert looked at Dominic, his face a plea for mercy. Dominic gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Robert turned back to the judge. He was the one who gave me the bad investments. Mark Benson, he bankrupted me. He set this all up. He set me up to get close to Ava, to frame her. He's obsessed with her. He wanted her ruined. He wanted her daughter. He is the monster. Mark let out a sound, a high animal keen. He lunged, not at Robert, but at Dominic. You did this. You bastard. Dominic did not even flinch. His two guards intercepted Mark, catching him in midair, and slammed him back into his chair with a force that knocked the wind out of him. He sat there, sobbing, broken, a pathetic, ruined man. The judge banged her gavel, her face a mask of cold fury. Order, order, I have heard. Enough, Mr. Henderson, your case is compromised. Mr. Benson, you are in contempt. This hearing is over. Motion denied with extreme prejudice. Custody remains. 100% none. With Miss Collins, Mr. Benson's visitation rights are suspended, pending a full psychological and criminal investigation. It was over. I sat there, numb. Tasha was crying behind me, her sobs of relief echoing in the suddenly silent room. Mister, Hayes patted my hand. It is done, Ava. You are free. Dominic turned. His guards were holding Mark, waiting for the bailiff. Robert was being led out a side door by Mr. Hayes' assistant. Dominic walked over to me. He looked down at me, his face unreadable as ever. He had done it. He had not just beaten Mark. He had annihilated him. He had used lies to fight lies. He had brought the full, terrible weight of his dark world into a court of law and bent it to his will. He had protected me. He had saved Emma. And he had done it with a brutality that terrified me. This was my choice. This was the man I had aligned myself with. A man who could make a terrified witness change his story with a single nod. A man who could destroy another man's life in an afternoon, all to settle a score. He offered me his hand, the same hand he had offered me on the church steps. It is time to go home, Ava, he said, his voice low, to your daughter. I looked at his hand. This was my life now. This world of violence, power, and terrible, binding loyalty. I had wanted safety for Emma. He had given it to me, but what was the price? What would be the price for me? I was no longer just Ava Collins, the nurse. I was Ava Collins, the fiancée of Dominic Raldi. I had made my choice that day at the church, and this was the consequence. I looked up into his dark, possessive, and, for the first time, triumphant eyes. And I put my hand in his. The ride back from the courthouse was thick with a silence that was entirely different from the one in the church. This silence was not brittle with humiliation. It was heavy, dense, and final. It was the silence of an execution completed, an ending. I sat in the back of the sleek, dark car, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Tasha was beside me, her breath still catching on quiet. Relieved sobs. She had held my hand through the entire, brutal hearing, and I knew her presence had kept me tethered to the ground. Dominic Raldi sat opposite us, in the seat facing backward, just as he had on the day he took me from the church. He was watching the gray city blur past the tinted window, his face a mask of stone. He had not spoken a word since we left the courtroom, since he had systematically and with surgical precision dismantled my entire life and rebuilt it in his own image. Mark was gone. Those words echoed in my head. He was finished. The judge, her face a mask of cold fury, had not only denied his motion but had ordered a criminal investigation based on Robert's coerced and entirely false testimony. Mark had been taken from the courtroom by a bailiff, a broken, weeping, and utterly defeated man. He was no longer a threat. He was, as Dominic had predicted, irrelevant. But the victory felt strange. It was cold. It had been won with lies, intimidation, and a terrifying display of power. Robert, his face a waxy, terrified mask, had been escorted out of the courtroom by two of Dominic's men, disappearing back into the shadows from which he had been summoned. He had played his part. He had been the weapon Dominic used to destroy Mark. And I had been the prize. When we arrived at the penthouse, the elevator doors opening into the vast, sunlit room, the quiet was almost too much. Emma was not there. She was with one of Dominic's security team, a woman. At a nearby park, she had been kept away from the stress of the day. Tasha finally let out a long, shuddering breath. She rushed forward and pulled me into an embrace so tight it ached. "You are safe?" she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Ava, oh my God, you are finally, truly safe. He cannot ever hurt you again." She pulled back, her eyes landing on Dominic, who was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city. Tasha's expression was one of profound gratitude, but it was also layered with a deep, new fear. She was my best friend, but she was an outsider to this world. She had just seen what this man was capable of. "Thank you," Tasha said, her voice small but firm, for saving her. Dominic inclined his head, a minimal, kingly gesture. He did not turn around. Tasha looked back at me, her eyes communicating 1,000 things, that she loved me, that she was terrified for me, and that she knew she could not stay. This was my life now, not hers. I should go," she said, gathering her purse. Call me every day." "I will," I promised, my throat tight. I walked her to the elevator. We held on to each other for a long moment, the last link to my old life, my old self. Then the door slid shut, and she was gone. I was alone with him. I turned. He was still at the window, his back to me. The silence stretched. "You lied," I said. My voice was not a whisper. It was flat, steady. It was a nurse's voice, assessing a wound. He turned to face me. His dark suit was impeccable. He looked as if he had just come from a business lunch, not the complete systematic destruction of a human being. "Yes," he said. He did not deny it. He did not excuse it. "You coerced Robert. You made him. You made him point the finger at Mark for things you probably did." "Mark was guilty," Dominic said, his voice a low, even rumble. "He was guilty of terrorizing you. He was guilty of threatening your child. He was guilty of a deep and abiding arrogance that made him believe he was untouchable. I simply used his own crimes against him. The lies were just the packaging, the truth. The truth was that he deserved to be removed." "That is not how the law works," I whispered, the old, naive Ava making one last, desperate stand. "It is how my world works," he said. He took a step toward me, and I held my ground. "I told you I would protect you. This is protection. Mark Benson will not be a problem again. He's facing multiple charges. Charges my lawyers will ensure the district attorney prosecutes to the fullest extent. He will lose his money. He will lose his reputation. He will, for a time, lose his freedom. He will never again have the power to file a motion, to make a threat, to even speak your daughter's name. He stopped, standing only a foot from me. I had to tilt my head back to look him in the eye. I made you a promise. Ava, he said, his voice dropping, becoming something more than just cold. It was possessive. I keep my promises. I had a choice. I could have made Mark Benson disappear. I could have had Robert Davidson silenced permanently. That is the traditional solution. It is faster. It is cleaner. My blood ran cold at the casual, brutal honesty of his words. But, he continued, his gaze holding mine, that would not have solved your problem. It would have created new ones. You would have spent your life looking over your shoulder. The police would have asked questions. The custody case would have remained open. You would not have been free. I chose to face him where he was strongest, in his own arena. I chose to use his own weapon, the law, against him. I beat him at his own game, in the light for the world to see. He said it with such conviction, such absolute certainty. He had not just chosen to use the law, he had chosen to pervert it, to bend it to his will, to show me and to show the world that even their most sacred institutions were no match for his power. He had not avoided violence. He had simply chosen a different, more sophisticated, and in many ways, more devastating form of it. And now, I said, my voice shaking, I am. What your property, the prize you won. For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed his face, surprise, and something else, something dark. You are not a prize, Ava, he said, his voice dangerously soft. He reached up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch was electric, and I flinched, but I did not pull away. You are my fiancé. You are the mother of your child, and you are under my protection. That is all. But it was not all. I knew it. He knew it. The weeks that followed were a surreal dream, the constant background static of fear that had been my life for 3 years. Vanished. It was gone. I woke up in the mornings and the air felt lighter. I did not check my email with a jolt of panic. I did not dread the sound of the telephone. Mark was gone, and he was buried in legal proceedings, his assets frozen, his name dragged through the mud. He was a non-entity. My life began to rebuild itself, but on a new foundation. I went back to the hospital just to see, but it was different. I was different. The whispers followed me. I was no longer Ava Collins, the overworked charge nurse. I was the Mafia Boss's fiancé. I saw the fear in my old colleague's eyes. I saw the morbid curiosity. I could not be that person anymore. I quit my job. I thought Dominic would be pleased. He was not. You are a healer, he said, finding me on the terrace that night. It is who you are. You cannot stop. I cannot be that person anymore, I said, turning away from him, looking at the city that now felt like it belonged to him. Because of you. And then be something else, he said. He came to stand beside me. Be a better version of it. I have resources, foundations, charities. You want to heal people, then heal them, but do it from a position of power, not helplessness. He was offering me the world, his world. And Emma, my daughter, the reason for all of this, she was blooming. The shadows under her eyes, the ones that had been there for so long, faded. She stopped having nightmares. She was enrolled in a small, private school with more security than a bank, and she was happy. She was thriving. She was, for the first time in her life, completely and unequivocally safe. I watched her one evening, curled on the expensive rug, drawing, a small, contented hum in her throat. Dominic was in his office, his voice a low, inaudible murmur behind a closed door. The world was still violent. It was still dark. But in this one, vast, glass-walled room, we had found a strange, impossible peace. Emma was protected. I was rebuilding. Mark was gone. This was the aftermath. This was the life I had chosen, or the life that had chosen me. The fear was gone, but in its place was something far more complex, a gratitude that was tangled up with a deep, unsettling dependence, a safety that was bought and paid for by a power I was still terrified of. I had found my peace, but it was a peace forged in the shadow of a dark king. The penthouse was no longer a cage, it had become a fortress, and in the 3 months that had passed since the day in court, it had, astonishingly, become a home. The silence that had once felt so sterile and cold was now a comfortable quiet, filled with the small, ordinary sounds of a life being lived. The click of Emma's crayons as she dropped them into her art box, the low hum of the city, now a backdrop, not a threat, the sound of my own steady breathing. The fear was gone. It had been such a constant companion for 3 years, a cold stone in my stomach, that its absence felt like a physical lightness. I woke up in the morning, and my first thought was not of Mark, not of lawyers, not of losing my daughter. My first thought was of the coffee brewing, of what Emma would want for breakfast. I had found my peace. Emma was the heart of that peace. She was a different child. The haunted, anxious look that had shadowed her small face was gone, replaced by the easy, bright laughter of a 5-year-old who knows she is safe. She adored Dominic. He was, to her, a quiet, tall giant who would appear in the evenings and listen, with a solemnity she found hilarious, to her detailed explanations of her drawings. He had built a fortress for her, and she, in return, had effortlessly breached his. And me? I was different, too. I had taken Dominic's advice. I was no longer a hospital nurse, a target, a victim. With his resources, I had opened a free pediatric clinic in a neighborhood that desperately needed one. I was healing children, not as an overworked, underpaid employee, but as a director. I had a purpose that was my own, built from the ashes of my old life, funded by the shadows of his new one. I was a warrior, as he had called me, just one with a stethoscope instead of a gun. My relationship with Dominic had settled into a strange, undefined domesticity. He was the dark, unmovable center of our new world. He was my fiancé, a title that had been a legal strategy, but now hung in the air between us, unspoken, undefined. He was a protector. He was a provider. He was, in all ways, a man of profound and terrifying responsibility. And I realized, with a clarity that was both thrilling and frightening, that I was in love with him. I had not fallen for his power or his money. I had fallen for his steadiness, for the way his eyes, those dark, whiskey-colored eyes, would soften when he looked at Emma, for the way he had seen me, truly seen me, on the day of the wedding, and not seen a victim, but a fighter. He was a man from a world of darkness, but his heart, the one he kept hidden behind walls of tailored wool and cold authority, was warm, and it was, in its own fierce, uncompromising way, true. I found him on the terrace one night. The autumn air was crisp, the city lights glittering below us like a sea of diamonds. He was watching the city, but he looked tired, a bone-deep weariness I'd only seen glimpses of before. I came to stand beside him, pulling my robe tighter. "You gave me my life back, Dominic," I said, my voice quiet in the vastness of the night. "You gave me back my daughter." He did not look at me, but his voice was a low rumble. "You were never mine to give. Ava, I just removed the obstacles." "This engagement," I said, my heart suddenly beating hard against my ribs. "It was for the court, a lie to save me." He turned then, his body shielding me from the wind. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "The court is finished. Mark Benson is finished. But you are still here." "I'm still here," I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. "Is it a lie, Ava?" he asked, and there was a raw, unguarded quality to his voice I had never heard. "For you." I took a breath. I was no longer the woman left at the altar. I was not a victim. I was not his property. I was his partner. No, I said, it is not a lie. Not anymore. He searched my face, looking for something. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. He raised his hand, the one that had held mine as he led me from the church, and he touched my face. His fingers were calloused, warm, his touch surprisingly gentle. I did not, he began, his voice rough. I did not plan for this. For you, for your daughter. You were a complication, a debt to be settled. And now, I breathed, leaning into his touch. You are my complication, he said, a shadow of a smile touching his lips. You are my peace. He lowered his head, and his mouth covered mine. It was not a kiss of fire or sudden passion. It was a kiss of arrival. It was a kiss that tasted of iron will and absolute certainty, of promises made and promises kept. It was a claiming, but this time, it was one I chose. It sealed the vow we had made in silence, in the courtroom, in the quiet nights in this fortress in the sky. I was his. He was mine. We had found our resolution. The peace lasted for 2 more weeks. It was shattered on a Thursday. I came home from the clinic, happy and tired, to find the penthouse silent. Emma was not in the living room. Her art supplies were packed away. I found Dominic in his office, and he was not alone. 2 men I did not recognize, were with him. They were older, dressed in severe, dark suits, and they radiated an aura of old world power that made my Dominic, seem young. They looked at me with cold, assessing eyes. Leave us, Ava, Dominic said, his voice flat, his face set in stone. He did not look at me. I did not move. Where is Emma? She is safe, he said, his eyes flicking to mine, a silent warning. Go to your room. We are finishing. The men stood. They nodded at Dominic, not with the deference of his guards, but with the measured respect of equals or superiors. The decision is made, Dominic, one of them said, his voice accented, heavy. You chose the public way. You brought her into the light. This is the consequence. The family cannot be exposed. You fixed one problem, you created a new one. She is not the problem, Dominic said, his voice a low, deadly growl. She is the reason for the problem, the other man said. You broke the code. You changed. You used the American courts like a common man. You showed them weakness. You showed them your weakness. They walked past me, their cold eyes dismissing me. The door closed, and we were alone. I stared at him. Who were they? What did they mean? I am the reason. Dominic raked a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration so human it startled me. He looked, for the first time since I had met him, truly lost. They are my family, he said, his voice heavy. The men who sit at the head of the table. The men I answer to. Answer to, I thought? I thought you were the boss. I am the boss of this city, he said, while walking to the window. They are the bosses of the world, the ones who set Robert in your path, the ones who were testing me, to see if I was still loyal, or if I had become soft American. The blood drained from my face. They were the ones who set this all in motion, not just to hurt Robert, but to get to me, to test you. Yes, he said. They did not care about Mark. They used him. They used Robert. They used you. They put you in front of me to see what I would do. And I did the one thing I was not supposed to do. What? I whispered. I chose you, he said, turning to me, his eyes burning with a dark, terrible fire. I chose you over the family. I chose to protect you, in the light, where they could see. I chose to change. And that they cannot forgive. What do they want? I asked, my voice trembling. They want me to fix it, he said. They want me to remove my weakness. They want me to, give you up, to send you away, to prove my loyalty. And if you do not? He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the warrior I had fallen in love with, the cold, ruthless boss. But this time, his fight was not for me. It was with me. Then it is a war, he said, his voice soft. Not against a pathetic bully like Mark, a war against my own blood, a challenge greater than anything I have ever faced. He had not just been protecting his new family, he had been challenging his old one. The end of one battle was just the beginning of a new, far deadlier one. The plot twist was not that someone was coming for us, it was that they had been here all along. He walked to me, pulling me against his chest, his arms a steel band around me. I was no longer a complication. I was the fuse. "This is my world, Ava," he whispered into my hair. "This is the true cost. Are you ready?" I thought of Emma, safe, asleep, blissfully unaware. I thought of the life I had, the peace I had found in his arms. I was not the woman he had found at the altar. I pulled back, just enough to look him in the entry level. "You are my family, Dominic," I said, my voice as steady as his. "I am not your weakness. I am your strength. Let them come." His dark eyes held mine. The future was a terrifying, unknown shadow. This new chapter was far darker, the challenge far greater. But as he leaned down to kiss me, I knew we were not at an end. We were at the beginning, and we would face it together. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I am so curious to know where you are listening from. So please leave a comment and let us know what part of the world you are in so we can all connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. And if you really want to show your support, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.